You're earning more than you ever have. The accounts are organized. The systems are in place. And yet, somewhere in the last 18 months, you stopped being able to see where the money actually went. This isn't a case of overspending. The budget still exists. The categories still balance. But control has separated from awareness in a way that wasn't visible until it was already complete. The income rose, the complexity rose with it, and the gap between what moved and what you noticed moving became structural. What failed here wasn't discipline. It was the assumption that earning more would automatically mean seeing more, that higher stakes would produce sharper attention, that the system would stay legible just because you were the one running it. It didn't. Start with the observable gap. 6 months ago, you had a working sense of cash position. Today, you can reconstruct it, but only by pulling statements, cross-referencing transfers, isolating one-time charges from recurring ones. The information exists, but it no longer arrives in time to mean anything. The income increase didn't announce itself as a visibility problem. It came with more accounts, a brokerage, a secondary checking buffer, a savings vehicle with better yield. Each one made sense in isolation. Together, they fractured the surface. Money began moving between structures you built, and those movements became invisible, not because they were hidden, but because they required assembly. Then, the expenses scaled. Not recklessly, proportionally. A second subscription tier, a higher insurance bracket, a few convenience purchases that weren't large enough to trigger concern. What changed wasn't the spending, it was the detection threshold. The old alerts were still set to flag 4-figure events, but the drift was happening in aggregated 3-figure movements across 5 surfaces. By the time you noticed the imbalance, it had been there for weeks. Not because you weren't checking, because checking had become reconstruction. The system doesn't care whether you're paying attention. It continues to execute. Transfers process. Balances update. Statements generate. The infrastructure assumes you are monitoring in real time. But real time is not a human cadence when the flow is distributed and continuous. This is not a behavioral failure. It's a detection lag built into the architecture of income growth. The more you earn, the more accounts you're told to use. The more accounts you use, the more surfaces require synthesis. And synthesis is not awareness, it's retroactive assembly. Control decayed the moment visibility required effort. You didn't stop caring. You stopped being able to see without working to see. And work introduces latency. Latency introduces drift. Drift becomes the norm before you notice it was ever the exception. What's missing is not motivation. It's continuous observation that doesn't depend on you remembering to look. AI in this context is not making decisions. It is not optimizing allocations. It is not offering advice. It is functioning as a background monitoring surface that removes the requirement for manual synthesis. It watches the accounts you've distributed money across. It tracks movement as it happens, not when you reconstruct it. It surfaces positional truth without waiting for you to ask. The value is not in what it tells you to do. The value is in what it prevents you from having to rebuild. You don't lose 3 weeks to drift because the gap never opens. You don't discover misalignment after it's embedded because the system is showing you position before position becomes a problem. This is not automation. Automation executes on your behalf. This is structural visibility, a layer that persists whether or not you're paying attention, so that when you do pay attention, the information is already current. AI removes the lag between what happened and what you can see. It doesn't tell you what to care about. It makes sure that when you care, the picture is already accurate. The timing gap collapses. The reconstruction step disappears.
What you're looking at is not a summary. It's a live surface.
It scales with the complexity you've already created. More accounts don't mean more assembly work. More income doesn't mean more surfaces to synthesize. The monitoring layer grows with the structure. You're not managing the system.
You're operating inside a system that is already maintaining its own coherence.
The failure was not spending. The failure was latency. Income rose. Infrastructure expanded. And the distance between movement and awareness became large enough that control stopped being real-time.
You can work harder. You can check more often.
But effort does not solve latency. Effort compounds it. The more you have to do to see clearly, the longer the intervals between seeing. And in those intervals, drift becomes position.
AI collapses that interval, not by deciding for you, by making the current state continuously available without requiring you to construct it.
At higher income, control doesn't vanish because you stopped trying. It vanishes because visibility stopped being automatic. The infrastructure fragmented. The monitoring became manual. And by the time you looked, the position had already moved.
AI doesn't fix the spending. It fixes the lag. It removes the reconstruction layer. It turns visibility back into a constant, not a periodic effort. The system stays coherent not because you're watching more carefully, but because something else is watching continuously.